Today we're going to use a Raspberry Pi Zero and a NeoPixel with some capacitive touch sensors to create a real-time stock indicator. The NeoPixel will glow green or red if the stock is up or down, and the capacitive touch sensors on the side of the case will allow us to scroll back and forth through our selected stocks. Once one is selected, we'll get real-time quotes from finhub.io. And no, we are not sponsored. And because this is meant to run all day long like any other lamp in your house, we'll be powering it with a universal power adapter set to 3 volts. The NeoPixels will turn off when the market is closed and on weekends, and they'll turn back on 30 minutes before the market opens. So there aren't a lot of parts to this build. The Raspberry Pi Zero W, Adafruit NeoPixel Jewel 7, and Adafruit 128 by 32 display. 2 capacitive touch sensors, and these guys come on a board with a whole bunch of sensors, and you just snap off what you need. DC jack for power with screw terminals just to make it a little easier, and the 100 UF capacitor. And this is just some spare proto board that I soldered on some header pins and soldered straight down all of the pins in the 2 sets just to basically make a positive and negative rail for power. So I'm going to cut this down to size. Need to get some wire soldered to the Jewel. Now this board, I'll show you a picture of the original, but I took a Dremel and notched out the screw hole that was there. This was actually meant to just plug into the first group of pins on the Raspberry Pi like this, and there was a matching screw hole that matched the mounting point here. So we're not going to use it that way, and it kind of interfered with the case itself. Speaking of the case, just a 3D printed enclosure. The bottom is white PLA and came out good enough, but had some trouble fitting the LCD in there, so I had to take a Dremel and modify it and kind of route things out a bit to make it fit. The top is just a dome made of natural PLA. It's not quite clear, but it's translucent enough that the NeoPixel looks pretty cool underneath. So the STL files, along with the schematics and written details of this project, will be on designbuilddestroy.com. So let's get started here. It's messy, but it'll do. We'll figure out how to kind of position everything into the enclosure itself. So this is a pretty simple build. There's just a few components to wire up. I'm using a plug-in power supply because it's supposed to be powered on all day and just kind of do its thing. The adjustable power supply I'm using outputs 3.4 volts on its 3-volt setting, which is perfect for powering all the boards. This device also doesn't have to be used with stocks. It was actually meant to be just kind of a platform to show anything visually that you like. You can easily change the code around to pull something like weather data from a different API and have it scroll through a 5-day forecast with the NeoPixel changing colors based on conditions, or anything else you could think of. So customizing the code to do other things is part of the fun with this project. For example, in my actual device that I've been using for 6 months now sitting on my desk, I'm using the actual APIs from my real brokerage account. It automatically pulls the list of stocks that are in my account and dynamically updates them, so I never have to manually add or remove stocks from the script. It just didn't make sense to do a video with that method since it would be very specific to my brokerage house and wouldn't apply to the majority of folks out there. The next video will be a more detailed walkthrough of the code itself, so if you're interested in that and learning how to tweak it to do other things, please subscribe to this channel and keep an eye out for it. First, let me say I'm not affiliated with FinHub in any way, but they have been a great source for real-time stock quotes at zero cost. Their API has very few limitations and works great for this project. So before we set up our Raspberry Pi, we need to go to finhub.io and sign up to get a free API key to use later in our software setup. So we'll set up our Raspberry Pi. I'm using a fresh install of Raspberry Pi OS Lite. There's no desktop on this. So we're going to load in our WA supplicant file that has the Wi-Fi information, so it will automatically connect on boot up, and a just blank file named SSH that will enable an SSH shell so we can have access to it. I'll just copy those into the boot folder. Next, we need to edit the config.txt and scroll down looking for this line here, dt_param equals I2C underscore ARM on. Uncomment that line so that I2C will be enabled. Save it, and now we can move our SD card into the Raspberry Pi. After plugging in the SD card and giving the Raspberry Pi 5 to 10 minutes to actually set itself up, we check to see if it is online and get its IP address to SSH into. The default password is Raspberry. Warns us about changing our password, which we will do later. Now that we're connected to the Raspberry Pi, we can complete the setup here to install the Python script. First, we'll want to do sudo raspi config, and this isn't needed, but I'm going to change the host name from Raspberry Pi to stocks LED. In boot options, we want to wait for network at boot so that we get a connection with each restart before the Raspberry Pi really gets itself up and running. In interfacing options, we want to just double check that I2C is enabled, even though we set it in the config file. We'll hit yes. And in localization options, we want to make sure we have the correct time zone and time setup. Then we can exit and let the Pi reboot. And after giving the Pi a minute to reboot, we'll SSH back into it and make a directory call stock LED, change into it. And I tried to make this as easy as possible. So you can do wget and this line here, which will be down in the description and also on designbuilddestroy.com to pull down a zip file with all the files you're going to need. So once you run that, you should have this zip file in your folder. So once we have our file downloaded, we can extract it. And we will have these files here. The setup.sh is a bash script that will pull down all of the requirements for Python. The stocks led.py is the actual script itself, and exclude.ttf is a open source free font that is used for the OLED display. Now we can make our setup shell file executable by running chmod u plus x setup.sh, or just run bash setup.sh. And we'll let this run to pull down all the Python libraries and dependencies that are needed for the script. And once that's complete, you should see this message with a reminder that you need to enable I2C and set up your time zones, which we did at the start. And now we just need to put in the finhub.io API key into the Python script so that we can use it. So we'll just use nano here to edit the Python script. And scrolling down, here's where you'll enter your FinHub API key. Make sure there are single quotes on the outside. And then on this line with stocks list, put in the symbols of the stocks that you wish to be viewing on your device. And you can add more just by putting a comma at the end and putting in another symbol in here. Once that's done, you can press Control X to exit, hit yes to save, and enter to keep the same file name. And now the very last step is going to be setting the Raspberry Pi to load this script on startup. Because this device has no monitor or keyboard attached, you don't want to have to SSH into it every time you power it up to launch the script. So we'll do that by typing cron tab -E. And since this is the first time we're using it, because this is a fresh install, I'm just going to choose nano. And we'll come down and insert this line. So what this line will do is on reboot, sleep for 120 seconds. That's to give time for the Wi-Fi connection to really make sure it establishes. If the Wi-Fi connection doesn't establish on restart before the Python script runs, the Python script will crash out. So this will give it a good delay to make sure it locks into place, and then it will actually execute the stocks LED Python script. Make sure your path is correct. So we put it in home pi stock LED underscore LED, and then the name of the script is stocks underscore LED.py. So once we have that in there, we can save it. So now we can do a quick test by running the actual script here. You do need sudo to run this. The Adafruit NeoPixel library requires it. So we'll do sudo python 3 stocks led.py, and you won't see anything on the screen here, but if you look at your device, the NeoPixel should start lighting up and you'll see display on the screen. And if you scroll through the stocks that you have listed, you should see your prices being pulled down from FinHub. So the only last thing to test is just restarting the Raspberry Pi and making sure the script loads itself on startup, and we're done. So thanks for watching. If you found any of this helpful or interesting, please consider subscribing to the channel. Leave a like down there and a comment if you have any questions. Check us out at designbuilddestroy.com for more information on the project and all the files to download, and we'll see you next time. Thanks.